Warren Buffett is stepping down after 70 years of investing. And while you may not be managing billions, the principles he followed and shared have never been more relevant, especially if you're approaching retirement. We unpack it all coming up today on Retire Smarter.
Hey, it's another episode of Retire Smarter. I'm Walter Strolt alongside Tyler Emrick, a certified financial planner, a chartered financial analyst as well, and a wealth advisor at True Wealth Design. And going to be a great episode today as we talk about one of the greats, Warren Buffett. Really looking forward to your takes on that, Tyler. But first of all, life treating you well? How things going?
Yeah, no complaints on my end, although the weather in Ohio is always crazy, so we're a little cold. We're in the mid-50s here towards the end of May, which is a little while. But yeah, outside of that, nothing, no complaints, and ready for spring and a little bit warmer weather for sure.
Yeah,
so,
we were driving back on Memorial Day here in Colorado from a quick weekend trip to the mountains, and we encountered 65-degree weather, 30-degree weather, lightning, lots of lightning, hailstorm, and snow, in addition to torrential rain. So it was quite the day driving back. And I got snow in late May. I was like, hey, you can't beat that. This is pretty fun.
Fair enough. So,
I think we're supposed to be in the 80s in another day or two. So, it's just crazy.
Hey, well, as long as
spring.
we don't get any snow, I'm good. All right.
Yeah, you're on the other end of that
no
spectrum, right?
snow.
You're like,
Come
leave
on.
the snow out of the equation, please.
Sure. Yeah.
Love it.
And I guess I can report we did have our second birthday. So I think I reported on our last podcast. It was right after the tea house with my youngest. So my oldest turned 6. So last week. So we were able to take a day off and spend some time with her. And she basically planned the entire day out. I think she listed out like 5 activities. We got her boiled down to like 2, putt-putt golf and kids empire. So that was, a good day. And, we hung out there. But the birthdays are behind us for this year up until next.
Awesome.
So,
Some of the best birthdays I think I had growing up are ones where my parents were like, hey, you pick the day. You map the day out. Those can be really great. As I get older, I'm more like, you just tell me what to do. I don't want to make a decision. So you just tell me what to do on my birthday, and that's the present. Like,
no, we were similar. We got to pick out where we went for dinner. So I don't know if I want to share exactly what was on my to-go dinner priority list as a kid growing up, but. You could probably hack me a little bit on some of the names that were thrown out there. No Applebee's, by the way. But
I was going to say, that was going to be my first guess was Applebee's.
So, yeah. But
I can't talk. I always ask to go to IHOP for breakfast on my birthday. So.
If you want to share IHOP, I'll share one of mine was Long John Silver's. That was it for a while. Yeah, the Hush Puppies. Well, and I never got fish. I always got their chicken strips. So as a kid, that was like my favorite. One of my.
I was going to say, like choosing fish as a kid would have been a bit of an odd choice. Yeah. So that makes sense that you wanted the chicken tenders or fingers.
Yeah, and then we moved up to Ponderosa and Red Lobster. Got in there a little bit as we got older.
Now there's a good pick. Cheddar biscuits. Yeah. Oh my gosh, those things must be 1,000 calories a piece, but they're amazing.
Yeah, I know. I don't know if they're still in business or not now. I know they had some issues and we were closing down. So maybe you'll find one spattered out there a little bit here in the Midwest. But yeah, good old Red Lobster for sure.
That's awesome. But, you had a little bit of a seafood kick when you were a kid, it sounds like, even if you weren't eating the actual seafood. But
you point that out. I wasn't. I never ate the seafood, but for whatever reason, places. Yeah. I guess that goes back to my my choices and maybe being a little. Do
you still go to seafood restaurants today and get like a steak instead of the seafood, or do you go to a steak restaurant and get the seafood? The opposite of what they say you're supposed to do.
No, I don't do too many seafood restaurants. No,
okay. Just as a kid.
Just as a kid, right? Yeah, the Long John Silver's every now and again, but yeah, no. So.
Well, we shouldn't have started off talking about seafood since we're talking about Warren Buffett on today's episode, and he being kind of in Omaha, right? The Oracle of Omaha, land of steak. We should have been talking about steak to start things off.
Agreed. Yeah, I can get on board with that. Well, speaking of Omaha, like one of the things that like triggered me to kind of think through the podcast and talk about Warren today was his shareholder meeting is in Omaha, Nebraska. And it's this big ordeal. Berkshire Hathaway's annual event. I'm sure you've ran into it, Walt. Many a times, right? These things
it definitely makes news every time they have a meeting and a get together, right?
Absolutely. I mean, normally you'd think of like, oh, it's just a financial update on Berkshire Hathaway, but these things have morphed into like part investing masterclass, a cultural phenomenon. I mean, a philosophy summit. I mean, so many things kind of going into it. I mean, I didn't realize like I think the stats that I seen, like thousands of people come into town for those events. So, certainly a pretty big deal. And of course, the one that happened earlier this month, he announced his retirement at the ripe old age of, I think 94 or something like that. What if I got it right?
Yeah, amazing. So, he's doing pretty good for that age. No kidding.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm sure most of the listeners would have heard in some way, shape, or form about Warren Buffett at some point in their life. I mean, but obviously, he's spent years working, I think over 70, I think in the lead-in, I said 70 years of investing. I think he was at Berkshire Hathaway over 70 years, and built one of the most successful investment track records, I guess, in history. And I think maybe even more importantly than saying something like that is like the way he did it, like he didn't do it by like chasing trends or, he didn't have like some secret sauce or anything like that. I mean, it was more about like consistent, disciplined, understandable philosophy that could be repeatable. And, if anybody has listened to the podcast here for any number of ones that we've put out talking about investing, I mean, how often do we harp on process? Because it helps you during times of volatility and, taking some of the emotion out of investing. I mean, that's a huge deal. And, I think when I think about Warren Buffett, and his style, I just think that, again, consistent, disciplined, and those are all the things that we try to replicate here at True Wealth Design as we think about developing a portfolio and managing a portfolio. I mean, it takes patience, maybe even more important, the long-term thinking about it, right?
Yeah, which is unusual in today's world, right? I mean, we're in a very short-term world. It's very difficult to be the long-term thinker, to be the long-term planner, to be somebody with that vision of, how am I going to be running this business at 95 or 94 years old? When maybe he was in his 20s, he was probably thinking that long-term, right? That's just in his nature. And you see the payoff, but sometimes it can be hard to implement that as individuals, right? You may want to, you may aspire to that, but it's hard to execute it.
No doubt. I mean, and so understandably, when I heard this news, I'm like, how can we turn it into a podcast? How can we make it, relevant to our listeners? I mean, this fascinating individual, I mean, I even looked up some stats on him, like something like 90% of his wealth was earned after he turned 65. Which I don't know if there's a more powerful argument for patience and longevity of investing and the power of compounding and, doing all the right things as you kind of think about your journey through working and, you're approaching the doorstep of retirement. Now, his doorstep of retirement was at in his 90s. I don't know how many listeners are maybe on that particular path. That's quite a unique one, but that power of compounding and wealth creation, 90% of his wealth created after he turned 65. It's a pretty wild stat.
I think there's a lesson in there, though, even for us non-billionaires, that is, as we should be in our prime earning years as we get into the later working life, and that means the opportunity to save, and that's why they have catch-up contribution opportunities, and also why picking the right way to retire, the right investments and all of that during that time. Now, when you have amassed your wealth through all those years of working, just shows the opportunity, if nothing else.
It does. Yep, absolutely. When we think about Warren Buffett, I mean, I don't know, pick your poison on how many quotes have come from Buffett over the years and, ones that we can kind of rely on and share. But I figured for the podcast today, we'll really I picked out some of my favorites and some of the ones that I thought, could, give some, good lessons and some good thought as an individual or a listener here, maybe on the doorstep of retirement and, taking, again, some of those principles and some of those things that Warren lived by and, applying them to your particular situation. So we'll just list out a few of these quotes and roll through them and see where it takes us, and then kind of finish up from there. But the first quote that we'll kind of tackle today is our favorite holding period is forever. Warren said, our favorite holding period is forever. Pretty relevant, especially going through the April that we just went through and did, a couple podcasts on from there. But I mean, certainly it's easy to say, long-term when you're in your 40s, but when you're retired, I certainly understand that, living off your portfolio, every downturn certainly can feel magnified. So I think, shows so much more importance on, why planning with intent, building in guardrails and things like that are just really so essential. And going back to, Warren, hey, 90% of his wealth, built after the age of 65. So, individuals on the doorstep of retirement, you still have got, a long way to go. I mean, shoot, hopefully we'll have a, 20, 30 year retirement to look at. It's not like you're going to need all those assets as soon as you transition into retirement and be doing it. So, you really want to make sure that when we build a portfolio, we're thinking about it in the terms of longevity. And shoot, if some individuals are, trying to leave a legacy for their children or charity or whatever the case may be, that time period may be much, much longer than 30 years. And we certainly don't want to lose sight of it. And when I was thinking about this quote, what came to mind is I was actually at a conference, an investing conference earlier this month, and they threw out a stat that was pretty eye-opening for me. So I figured I would share it, and I think it kind of goes down into the benefits of thinking long-term. And the stat shows, it basically states that there are actually 3 decades, so 3 10-year periods where treasuries actually outperform the S&P 500. So treasuries, think, some of the safest investments, interest-bearing investments that you could potentially put your money in and invest in, generally we get paid for taking on risk. And that's why we invest in the stock market over time. It, builds value and builds wealth. But there were 3 10-year periods where, investing in treasuries would have yielded you more return over that 10-year period than investing in the S&P 500.
And so not just cherry-picked decades to find the perfect 10-year gap, but just looking at, the actual 10-year, the true decade bracket.
Yes. Like, for example, we got the 30s, which is the start of the Great Depression. We got the 70s, high inflation, economic stagnation resulted in just poor market performance over that period of time. And certainly we had rising interest rates that benefited some of the bond returns. And then, of course, probably most recently is the lost decade, the 2000s, where we had bookend of the dot-com bubble. And then we had the great financial crisis, of course, 2008. But I kept thinking, sitting down with the families and, the clients that I work with, and them going for 10 years in a row, me saying, hey, hang tight. I promise you, investing in the stock market is going to yield higher results than just leaving it in cash and investing in those safe investments. And, towards the end of that 10-year decade, just how hard those conversations and how disciplined you would have to be to go back and say, hey, history tells us that, sure, there can be these long, drawn-out periods of time where, the stock market maybe doesn't perform as what we expected to. And that's okay. And it's, I don't want to say it's normal, but it's certainly not out of the realm of possibility. We've seen it in the past. And again, just going back to the discipline that it would take to be able to kind of say, all right, no, I'm using historical information to put myself in the best position going forward in construction, and how hard that would be, heading into, at the end of one of these decades where the stock market just, didn't perform the way that we had expected. So, really sat with me hard, and we can pick with that. I mean, on really any, part of the market. Well, hey, this type of stock has outperformed this type of stock, or this geography is better than that geography, or whatever. There are some pretty extenuating time periods, or not extenuating, but long time periods where, historical norms on, what has traditionally outperformed might not outperform. And the question is are we using good thought and good data to put ourselves in the best position forward? Or are we getting caught up in some of that maybe recency bias and, some of what we've seen here as of late, right? From an investor. So, good quote. Our favorite holding period is forever. And
that's a great lesson.
Your time horizon, and being mindful of that time horizon is extremely important.
I think my favorite quote is the next one you have on the list.
Is it? Yeah, I read it out there. Well, come on, lay it on us. What is it?
Be fearful. Oh, no, I'm sorry. This is my second favorite. There's another one that's my favorite. Yeah,
okay,
sorry.
All right, we'll save your favorite. Let me get this one, and then you get in and get the favorite. So, be fearful when others are greedy, and greedy when others are fearful. Sounds easy to do, doesn't it?
It is much harder to put into practice, though. That is for sure.
It is. For anybody who listened to the last podcast that I did with Kevin and you, Walt, we were talking about market performance. I think that was kind of in the thick of April and some of the volatility and tariff news and all that other good stuff.
We have to have crises to get Kevin into the podcast. So every once in a while, we need a good crisis to get Kevin back in here.
But that was a good one. And in there was a quick comment that I made about one of the favorite slides that I share with clients and families when appropriate. And it goes back to this idea of consumer confidence and sentiment index. And there's a study done by University of Michigan, well, not a study, but a survey that's put out monthly by the University of Michigan. And it really just, tries to, get an idea of how good are people feeling about the economy and return expectations and the stock market. And this thing goes back a number of years. So we have a pretty good data to pull from. And if you look at it, I mean, obviously the line on where people are feeling, I mean, it's up, down. I mean, it's all over the place. But, if you kind of pick the 10 peaks, so peak would be when people are feeling really good about the stock market or the economy. And we pick the 9 troughs, like some of the worst time periods that we've experienced, like from a feeling standpoint. We're actually in one of those troughs right now. April survey put us down really low, really on par with, how people were feeling back in 2008 and how people were feeling back in, March of 2020 when, COVID, was really just coming on the scene. And,
it's interesting how quickly our confidence can be shaken, right?
It is. But the reason why I really like the chart is, again, it takes these 10 peaks, good times, and it takes these 9 troughs, people are feeling rough. And then it just takes an inventory of the stock market performance, specifically the S&P 500 over the next year. And as you can imagine, if we would have invested at those 10 peaks when people are feeling great, average return over that next year is about 4%, a little less. If we look at the 9 troughs, the average return is just over 24% in the S&P 500. So
I'll take that.
It really does get kind of at the crux of like, well, hey, be fearful when others are greedy and greedy when others are fearful. And, I think the big thing here is like, certainly market fear can signal opportunity, but really it's only there if you're prepared to act on that opportunity and feel confident in making that decision. I think back of like November of 2008 is probably one of the worst times that I can remember. You speak with families during that time period. I mean, maybe your house value was a fraction of what it was. Maybe you're unemployed because of so many layoffs. Your 401k account cut in half. That's a lot to digest. And you start thinking about, well, if an investor or an advisor would have come to you and been like, now's the time, start taking on more risk, buy more opportunity, and you're worried about like your job and you're worried about your house and putting food on the table. I mean, these are some of the most challenging times as an investor. And you think about like what a financial plan would do for you during those time periods is like all that preparation and putting that plan together is really, it's meant there to gain clarity on times like that and really try to take as much of, you're not going to always take all of it out, but take as much of that emotion out of the decision so that way you can put your best decision forward, right? A financial plan is going to give you, well, hey, what's your required rate of return, on your investments to make your plan, work? Hey, we've ran bear market tests. We do those now, very similar to saying, hey, what would your portfolio do back in 2008 based off the risk? And hopefully you've done some of those tests so that way when your accounts start to lose those dollars and they become real, you can go back to that financial plan and say, all right, hey, I'm still within the parameters that I expected. My goals are still all out in front of me, and I can meet those with no problem. And then you can kind of really get down into the nitty gritty of making a good financial decision around your investments, whether that would be, is it a buying opportunity? Is it not? Maybe it's just staying course and not selling out and feeling very uncomfortable with, the losses that you had. But whatever it is, I mean, I think planning, really is your advantage, in times where the market is extremely volatile. So being greedy when others are fearful, I think it's not about taking wild bets on the market, but it's about calmly doing the right thing because you're prepared in advance, right? Is more the way that I kind of think about it.
I think that's a good sentiment. And you're right. I think back to, if there's a financial crisis or moment that we're going through, but it feels very stock market, constrained, it seems like it's a little easier to see the right decisions and the clarity in those moments. When it starts like 2008 to bleed over into job and life and, the future of the world, it's a much more difficult arena to make still those same kinds of decisions in.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot, a lot on your plate, a lot that's being managed there, not just the investment side of things. So
that's when having some outside guidance, draws a clear line in the sand of being very helpful and very valuable.
Yes, absolutely. So I think we're down to 2 quotes left. So, okay. I mean, you mentioned the favorite. Is this one?
This is not the favorite, but this is a good one.
So this is a good one. So, and so this quote here is essentially, if you're in the luckiest 1% of humanity, you owe it to the rest of humanity to think about the other 99%.
Okay.
So I know many of our listeners might not be in that top 1%. Do you know how much net worth you got to have to be in that top 1%, say age 60 to 65? I looked it up real quick before the podcast today. Any quick guesses?
I don't know, 10 million. I'm just
you're in the ballpark. Yeah,
okay.
I'd have no idea. I was like, I looked it up. I wasn't even in the ballpark. So the statistics from 2023 said it's a little over 15 million.
Oh, okay.
Is what you would have. So, I mean, that's a pretty sizable nest egg, right? I mean, I'm sure that a lot of our listeners would go, okay, yeah, I'm not in the top 1%, but I'll get down to the point and how I think this is going to be applicable. So what spurred this too is this quote, and what I think is so fascinating about it. Has you ever heard of the Giving Pledge? I'm sure you have, or maybe.
Yeah.
Yep. So
Bill Gates and Melinda Gates, I think, kind of started that.
You got it. Yep. And that was started all the way back in 2010. Warren was actually part of that. And essentially it's these group of billionaires who essentially commit to giving away, I think it's almost 99% of their wealth, either over their lifetime or at their passing. And it kind of goes. And again, hey, that's nice. They're a billionaire. Hey, still got 1% left is quite a bit.
That's right. They're going to be just fine.
That. But what I think is so fascinating about that decision, and I think it's applicable to the families listening, or the individuals listening, is going to be this idea that Warren just retired, right, this year. So we're in 2025. So essentially he made that pledge 15 years before he was going to retire. Sure, I'm sure he's got a lot of excess wealth. So maybe that decision became a little bit easier for him. But having the power to make a decision like that 15 years before you're retired, I think still takes some planning, right? I think Warren had to have a little bit of an idea of where his wealth was projected, where it was going, what he wanted to do with that wealth, whether it be give it away or support some of his family or whatever the case may be. That's a big decision. And I felt like it was made really early on, certainly 15 years before he actually, retired. And we think about the individuals and the families that we meet with on a day in and day out basis. They're trying to do some of the same things, right? You're trying to make decisions in the now for what your wealth might look like, 20, 30 years down the road. Hey, do I have enough? Can I go on that vacation? What's going to be left, right? So I think there's a lot of value in planning, and specifically planning to get an idea of how your wealth changes over time. So that way you can come back and feel empowered to make decisions in the now, right? Having that data, I really truly feel like puts you in a better position to be able to make very well-informed decisions. And I think Warren, doing some of that planning, understanding how his wealth is, empowered him to be able to make some of those decisions. And I think he had a plan. And I think every family listening here today should have some type of financial plan put in place to help them make that decision. And I think at the crux of it all, it's like, well, what is the highest and best use of your wealth? And how do you want to spend that? How do you want to use it? And what does that look like? Because it's different for everybody. And sometimes that there can be roadblocks of how do I do some of this, right?
Sure.
Hey, I want to gift to my children. How do I do that? What are the limits? Do I need a family loan? I want to gift to my church or charity. How should I do it? A donor advised fund? Should I gift highly appreciated stock? All these things. Sure, there's the logistics of it and the planning around it. And that's where, hey, a good financial advisor should help you navigate all those tools that are in place to help you make that decision. But a lot of times it's not necessarily the logistics of the decision. It's about the confidence to be able to make it. So
yeah.
For example, a couple of weeks ago, we're in the thick of our what we call progress meetings. So that's like our just yearly update meeting where we go in and meet with families and talk about just how has things progressed year over year? What does that financial plan look like? What's on the docket for expectations? did you spend what you expected to? How has your priorities changed? What does the plan look like? Right. And one of the individuals, we had a great meeting. About a week after the meeting, he kind of shot me an email, and in the email, during that meeting, we had talked a lot about we'd actually increased their monthly distribution because they weren't really spending what they had in the plan. There a lot of times you'll find these families where it's hard to change that spending pattern, right? You saved your entire life. It's not like just flipping a switch and saying, hey, I'm going to just go spend everything now and be perfectly fine, right? So we had tried a few things to kind of nudge them a little bit to say, all right, well, let's set up a distribution that's set with the spending that you said you wanted to do. And of course, a year later, when we're reviewing that cash has started to build up inside of their, checking and savings accounts.
It's a good problem to have, right?
It is, right? So then you kind of can get back to the crux of it and start having a conversation, as we kind of did, about let's be realistic here. We tried it that way. We thought we would spend on certain things. It didn't kind of come out that way. Is there other things or other uses that we should be doing with that money? Because certainly within the plan results and the way things look, it's well within their means to do that. They're just not. So his email a week later came back and said, "Hey, I decided to give more to our church, from our conversation because we built it in there," right? So I think that goes back to and the way the email kind of came across. It was like this almost relief of "Hey, I found a use case for it. Hey, I feel so good about being able to do it and go." And that's what I mean by finding that highest and best use of your wealth, and maybe thinking about things that you would otherwise not, and keeping yourself and holding yourself accountable to doing those, right? Hey, I want to do this. I didn't. Why didn't I do that? And should I adjust those goals and rethink where we're going to be putting them? So
yeah, I think so much of this comes down to comfort or confidence, as you put it, because this is not just a retirement thing either, right? I think even in our ages, and trying to be generous and give, but at the same time, not sure if I do give that much, is that money I could use for this purpose or to help this family member, or is it just going to make me okay financially? I want to make sure I'm not cutting off my own legs as I'm trying to help somebody else and put my own oxygen mask on first, and it's tough without a plan to then feel confident in any of those decisions, and a lot of it can feel very random. That just amplifies, I'm sure, in retirement, when now you don't have that regular job and paycheck helping to replenish and the potential to make more to help with that confidence. So yeah, having that plan in retirement, because my guess is the desire is there for a lot of people to want to give while they're living. Who wouldn't want to be able to support while they're living and not have it all be after you pass away that it goes to help? That's great too, but a lot of people would want to see that impact and that effort while they're still living. But I think it's the confidence that prevents more people from doing it.
Sure. Oh, absolutely. I agree with you wholeheartedly. And part of these quotes, and I think the theme as we kind of think about today in the podcast is putting yourself into a situation to where you can actually make some of these tougher decisions. Yeah. And being thoughtful and intentional and deliberate about it. I mean, is huge. So. Well, we're down to the last one, so this one must be it, huh?
It's not the favorite, so you don't have it on, you don't have it on your list. So share your
favorite real quick.
So I'll give you the favorite, so then we can focus on the one that you came up with. And it was the only when the tide goes out do you discover who's been swimming naked. That was that was my favorite Warren Buffett quote.
I like that one
because it has he's got a little bit of a Yogi Berra tinge to some of his quotes. Just a little bit odd, a little bit off, and kind of make you laugh and chuckle a little bit. So.
Absolutely. No, I like that one. I do like that one. I'm glad you shared it. Okay, fair enough. Well, we'll get to the final one that I had on here, which is
this is the most inspiring one, right?
Sure. Yeah. I like that. Inspiring. Let's say that. But yes, the quote is essentially, and it's very simple, the best investment you can make is in yourself. As I kind of think through that, I mean, whether it's, holding tight through downturns, buying when others are fearful, committing to being deliberate about where your assets are going and how you're using the wealth. I mean, these are big decisions, right? And having some type of consistency, some type of process, some type of tool in your toolbox to help you navigate and make those decisions, I think really help you, especially in times of uncertainty, as we kind of think about that. And clearly, they're not just billionaire ideas, which obviously I wouldn't have shared them, throughout the podcast here if I thought they were just billionaire ideas. I think they're truly applicable and to the families that are listening here. So you just kind of think about the takeaways from the quotes. I mean, one, it's just again being deliberate about your planning to help you through some of the tough times. Certainly investing in yourself and how you want to use your wealth, I think, is going to be big. Thinking through how your assets change over time, doing that type of planning to help you make better decisions in the now, I think are just really all good, strong takeaways as you kind of think about how some of these quotes might be applicable to you. And of course, well, as it always does, kind of boils back to that, the financial plan, I think, is a framework to be able to get you to that point, and the tool that is best going to be able to put you in a position to construct a very solid portfolio, not get caught up in the emotional drops of the investment market, use your money to its highest and best use. All those things that we kind of talked about today. I think the tool truly is that financial plan.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Tyler, and appreciate all your perspective today and talking about the Oracle of Omaha on the show, Warren Buffett, and lessons we can learn from him. And love that you guys embody so much of that into your planning process and into true wealth design. I mean, this is what it's all about, thinking long-term, thinking about others, and planning appropriately along the way. So if any of this resonates with you as you listen to today's episode and you'd like to get a more solid financial plan in place or explore what that might look like, look at what the difference could be with proper planning in your life, you can certainly reach out. The best way to begin with the True Wealth team, True Wealth Design team, is to go to truewealthdesign.com. Click the Let's Talk button and you can schedule a 20-minute discovery call with an experienced advisor on the team. That's all you have to do. truewealthdesign.com. We've got it linked in the description of today's show to make life easy on you as well. And you can always call the phone number as well, 855-TWD-PLAN, 855-TWD-PLAN. That's you're more than welcome to do that route as well. Well, Tyler, thank you so much for the help. Really appreciate it, and we'll look forward to catching up with you on the next episode.
Yeah, it was great.
Information provided is for informational purposes only and does not constitute investment, tax, or legal advice. Information is obtained from sources that are deemed to be reliable, but their accurateness and completeness cannot be guaranteed. All performance reference is historical and not an indication of future results. Benchmark indices are hypothetical and do not include any investment fees.